Today's topic is war and approval ratings. It's going to be an interesting discussion. Let's talk about how war affects the approval ratings of governments and leaders, including the historical background.
Wait, there's a connection between war and approval ratings. That sounds kind of scary.
You're right, there is a scary side to it. But historically, wars have sometimes boosted leaders' approval ratings or even saved their declining popularity. When you think about war and leadership, showing strong leadership during wartime can be a powerful way to gain support.
But why would approval ratings go up because of war? War is dangerous and a lot of people suffer.
That's a great question. When a war starts, people often feel a strong sense of patriotism, thinking, we have to defend our country. If the leader frames the war as being for the nation or for freedom, many people rally behind them. This is sometimes called the rally round the flag effect, a psychological phenomenon where people unite under the leader during a crisis.
I see. It's kind of like how people cheer for their team in a game. But why do leaders decide to go to war? Aren't there other options?
That's a good point. In some cases, leaders choose war when their approval ratings are dropping. You could call it a popularity recovery strategy. For example, if economic policies are failing or there's a scandal, a leader might think, how do I regain public support? By creating an external enemy and declaring a confrontation, they can create a mood of, let's protect our country, and bring people together.
So, is it like how the Nazis made Jews the enemy?
Exactly. Hitler in Nazi Germany used the Jews as a scapegoat to distract from economic crises and political instability. By directing public anger and fear toward an external enemy, the regime gathered support. The same kind of thing can happen with war.
So, leaders might start a war just to hide their own failures.
Yes, many leaders throughout history have used that tactic. For example, in 1982, the Argentine government faced an economic crisis and low approval ratings, so they started the Falklands War to rally public support. Of course, it ultimately failed in the long run.
So, war becomes kind of like a leader's cheerleading strategy. But do people really fall for that?
In the short term, yes. During a major crisis like war, people tend to trust their leaders more, thinking, we need to cooperate with our leader right now. If the war goes well, the leader can be praised as a strong figure, and their approval ratings can rise.
But what happens if the war doesn't go well? If they lose, won't that backfire?
Absolutely. If the war is lost or drags on with severe economic and human costs, the leader's approval can plummet. A good example is the Vietnam War for the US President Johnson. As the war dragged on, his approval ratings fell dramatically, and he ultimately chose not to seek re-election.
So, starting a war is really risky. Why do some leaders still choose war?
The risk is high, but the potential short-term gains can be significant. Especially when elections are coming up or approval ratings are dropping fast, leaders feel pressured to take bold action. And war can be one of the most dramatic options. Historically, many leaders have chosen war to be seen as strong and decisive.
Can you give an example from the US?
In US history, many of the great presidents were involved in wars. For example, Abraham Lincoln fought the Civil War to keep the country united. Franklin D. Roosevelt led during World War II and helped the U.S. become a victorious power. More recently, George W. Bush declared the War on Terror after the 2001 attacks, and his approval ratings initially skyrocketed.
I see. So, if a leader wins a war, they're seen as a great president.
Exactly. Winning a war often turns leaders into heroes. War is such a significant event that it can cement a leader's place in history. That's why many of the US presidents considered great were involved in wars and came out on top.
So, does that mean winning a war determines a leader's greatness?
Unfortunately, that's often how it's seen. A leader who shows strong leadership and wins a war tends to be considered great. But whether that's the right standard for greatness is definitely open to debate.
It feels like leaders are using war to boost their approval ratings.
You're not wrong. War can sometimes be a leader's trump card. When approval ratings drop, they might resort to war to regain support. That's why the reasons for starting a war aren't always about national security or justice, but can include personal or political motives for the leader.
So, leaders sometimes start wars just to hide their own mistakes.
Yes, when their approval is falling due to scandals or failures, leaders might create an external enemy and fight them to show they're a strong leader. This is similar to strategies like scapegoating, as with Nazi anti-Jewish policies. And war is one concrete example of this kind of tactic.
It's scary to think wars might start for reasons like that. People need to keep a closer eye on their leaders' decisions, don't they?
Absolutely. It's crucial to understand the motives behind wars and look critically at leaders' actions. War should never be used for personal political gain or to recover approval ratings.
After today's conversation, I really understand now that war isn't just an event. It can be part of a leader's political calculations.